Renee was the chairperson of the Joplin Long-Term Recovery. So they had a lot of mental health issues that they were dealing with in Joplin. Just from the number of deaths, the number of injuries, and just the total devastation of the community. For the past 30 years, Renee has been a professional social worker in various fields, including child welfare, medical, death and dying, substance abuse, domestic violence, and mental health, including a grant-funded school-based mental health program post-disaster. We often overlook the children in this disaster. We often overlook mental health recovery from these disasters, and we're making a mistake doing it. The one thing that I truly regret that we did not do well as the Bastrop County Long-Term Recovery Team is the mental health aspect of recovery from our disaster. Joplin concentrated very hard on that aspect of recovery. And so I'm hoping you pay close attention, because I think that the PTSD is real. I can tell you that every single little tiny fire that starts in Bastrop County creates hysteria. I'm sure every time a storm starts brewing in Joplin, it creates hysteria. Every time there'll be a storm out in the Gulf now, you're going to have people that are going to get hysterical. You have to learn to deal with that as a community. I'll present to you Renee White.
Thank you. Is this my little clicker? All right. So this is so groovy being here. Thank you for having me and for allowing me to speak for a little bit about specifically maybe the Joplin disaster and some of the strategies we put in place. But really I want this to be maybe 45 or 50 minutes for you to actually do what I love best. And I have a great saying that I hope you'll do for the next 45 to 50 minutes with me. And that is that we have been called to be human beings, not human doings. So I'd like for you to put down everything, close all those electronics, and just be. Okay, now some of you guys are gonna, like, did your heart start racing already? Like, oh, I can't do that. Does she not know I have a to-do list? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm with you. But to be, I really do believe it's our calling. And I'll go to Pastor Blackburn. We have a calling, a spiritual calling. That is what we are called in the Bible as human beings. That is our birthright, is to be human beings. And so to be, the BE, the acronym, is to breathe and enjoy. So I'd love for you guys to do that for the next 45 minutes with me, is to just breathe and enjoy. And I guarantee you at 4 o'clock that same to-do list will be waiting on you. You know what? And I certainly understand if you need to take a phone call or whatever. But really, this, I hope, is a testimony of we're going to practice some care, some emotional and mental health care, so that you guys can take these things back to your community. So I have it kind of designed out as both individual care and then also community care. So one of the things that Chris said when she introduced me is that not a day goes by when there's a storm that Joplin doesn't get a little goosey. Our storm happened on graduation day, May 22nd of 2011. This year, high school graduation was on May 20th, 2018, Sunday night, and we had a storm. Yeah. So it doesn't even have to be that closely related, but it was this year. We had a storm, everything was fine, but you got to believe that people are still reacting. So, on with the show. So I do talk like a hick. I know that y'all is kind of a Texas thing, but I'm from the Ozarks, so we kind of think we're hicks also. So how are y'all doing? And so I really want you to spend a few minutes answering these questions, and then I want to preempt it as well. I love when Nina was talking about volunteers. These are questions that I wrote up when our volunteers were leaving our community, those groups that came in for a week or came in for a long weekend. I had a nice little half-page paper, and I didn't bring it with me, but it said something about thank you for your gifts, that the Joplin community will not forget you. We thank you. Please hold us in your heart as you leave and travel back home. And this is kind of a debrief. Please take one of these 3 questions, one to 3 of these 5 questions, and thoughtfully consider them. And I did that really out of a sense that I have about beginnings and endings, that endings are as important as beginnings. In fact, if I ever write a book, I'm going to call it Life is a Series of Hellos and Goodbyes, because that really is what we're doing on this journey. We're opening doors and closing doors and opening doors and closing doors. So I want to spend a few minutes in your group. Are you guys willing to be participants? Okay. So let's just, these are where it says thus far. When I wrote these up for sending off the volunteers, it didn't say thus far, it was just at this end, but I know you guys are in the middle of your marathon. I'm kind of like with Jeff, I thought we were going to tell you that tomorrow, but anyway, now that you know, 26.2 miles. Just in the first table over here, use question number 1. The kind of second grouping of tables answer question number 2. The third grouping of tables answer 3. And then over here, let's just answer 4, the last grouping. If you don't like what question I just gave your table, you can do whatever you feel like it, because we're human beings. There are no correct answers. But I'd like for you to individually, so that the rules is individually say, what is your proudest team accomplishment? And then hear everybody else at your table, and then join together and kind of, we're going to summarize that so that we have a few shout outs by the time we're done. Does that make sense? Any questions? All right. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do this. Okay, 5. I'll give you 5. Nice job.
Is it ginger? Brushing his teeth or sharpening his teeth.
All right, are you guys ready? A little bit of a report out. Anybody need more money or more time? I know you need more money. Heard all that, yeah. More time? Good? Okay. Thank you all for indulging in this. So what I'd like to do is, if we can get to every table, that's great. If this is really your guys' time to, again, debrief, just be present, not have to worry about if you can take enough notes to figure all this out, because it'll come to you. So the people that answered number 1, what is your proudest team accomplishment thus far? Okay, in the back?
So our proudest accomplishment amongst One Star Foundation, Salvation Army, and Center for Disaster Philanthropy is 3 very different organizations, some national in scope, some local in scope, some state-based, have been able to work collaboratively despite all of the bureaucratic and political pressures that we all collectively face alongside U of all in the field. And we've been able to really make some incredible headway in our communities.
Excellent, thank you.
We haven't killed anyone.
What did you say? I'm sorry?
We haven't killed anyone.
Excellent.
That was the actual comment.
Yes. Me and Roseanne Barr said that a lot. If the children are all alive at the end of the day, I've been a good mother. Yeah, it's a joke. Okay. Anybody else with number 1? Okay, thank you.
Our proudest moment came very early on, like late September. Barbara McIntyre, my co-chair, and I were given an opportunity by St. Vincent de Paul, who was working with A&M University on developing SOPs and models for disaster recovery. Put together a packet that St. Vincent de Paul asked us, the long-term recovery group, to deal with, and we put together what was called a PRAC, which was a parish recovery assistance program.
Nice.
And in 10 days, we were able to identify over 75 volunteers. These were the people that we had worked with previously from many agencies in the community and volunteers from churches and this kind of thing. What we did was be able to invite the community through radio talk shows and bulletins in churches and this kind of thing to come to our site, and we were able to register people in the whole Beaumont diocese for entry into the CAN, so that they could be registered with FEMA and get a head start into all of this. In addition to all of the volunteers, we had people like the Cajun Army and Cajun Navy who worked with us. They told me that I had made it because I was on the, I was posted. That meant I was on a grease board, you know, if you got something that you wanted to give away, call those people. And they helped unload well over 50 18-wheelers. And so we had product to give, water, cleaning supplies, that kind of thing. We were able to give them small gift cards to go to Walmart and get food from McDonald's and places like that.
Awesome. Congratulations. The power that's greater than one person, and it all fell into place so quickly. Isn't that awesome? Yep. Anybody else on number 1? Number 2, what is your best memory or moment? 2 tables, who would like to give a shout out? Thank you.
So we talked about a little bit earlier about how supplies would just show up, and sometimes we weren't sure how we were going to utilize those, or hadn't even asked for them, actually. And so probably a week and a half after the storm hit, a pallet of charcoal showed up. And we thought, what are we going to do with this? And so I brought a bag of charcoal to a family, to a lady who had 3 children. They'd lost all their appliances. You know, they were eating out of cans and so forth. And so when I gave her the charcoal, she cried and said this was the first hot meal. This would enable her to cook the first hot meal she could for her family since the storm hit. And that one bit of gratitude has made the rest of the 9 or 10 months just absolutely worth it.
Awesome. And in our limited minds, and that's just human nature, what in the world are we going to do with X?
Well,
and then somebody's over there needing, and somebody's over there needing X.
So
and when we connect that,
we did makeshift grills. We gathered bricks and grills.
Grates.
Charcoal underneath it and have a way to cook.
Isn't that neat? Number 2? Anyone else? Thank you very much. Anybody else on number 2? Number 3. Oh, please. Thank you.
I'd say my best memory so far is we had recently one of our first families we built a home for, and about a week after she showed up and we said, hey, what do you need? And she said, nothing. I just wanted to say hi. And she still comes by week after week, and she's still our client, and when people are nervous from the undocumented community, she reaches out to them and let them know that we are trustworthy.
Isn't that wonderful? The circle gets completed when somebody gets to do the help that they once received. And so you are giving her a gift that she was on the receiving end, and now the circle is completed because now she is giving. So awesome.
And for me, it was one of the little disasters we had. It was a tornado, but we had some volunteers coming with chainsaws, and so I kind of went out beforehand to let people know that they were coming. And I had a gentleman say, no, we've got it covered. Well, about halfway through the afternoon, he called me back and he was like, you think they can come over? And because they were like killing it on the street, cutting up trees and stuff. And a couple hours later, I stopped by to see how he's doing. He came out in tears and said, I cannot believe the amount of work that these guys did. They just saved us months.
Neat. Thank you. So I intentionally start with a couple good questions. And so now we go into to maybe where the scar hasn't healed yet. What has been the hardest part of the work? And then number 4 is what could you have done differently? So those are 2 things that maybe are in our private life that we don't talk a lot about. And so table 3s, anybody would like to talk about what's been the hardest part?
We talked a little bit about expectation setting with clients and just how quickly everyone had to kind of gear up. But we also discussed, I think for Harvey being such a huge impact, a lot of helpers were affected. And so, Michelle and I were both personally affected by Harvey, and that work and personal balance and how difficult that was to stand up for your job, but also still take care of everything and managing all the things that are going on at home as well.
Thank you. And I obviously I'm only here for about 45 minutes, but I have lots and lots of literature specifically about that, but other things. There's a great article out there, and it's called The Shared Traumatic Realities, and it is when we are the helpers and the survivors together. And how do we? My husband is a fireman by training, and so probably more in his world, when our disaster hit, that obligation of responding professionally to the disaster, but then also myself and my children were at home. And so, and myself as a social worker during that time, I worked at a university as a professor, and school was out and all that stuff. But there have been other jobs in my life when a disaster occurs. I used to work at a domestic violence shelter, and somebody said this earlier, that some of our social problems increase after a disaster. And so the obligation to get to work, even though your butt's kind of fallen off yourself, and how do you match that? And then if you are a type A person or a person that gets applauded for all the work you do in your community, it can really distort yourself to think, well, I've got to go there first before I look after my own home fires. So I'm glad you brought that up. That is a very hard struggle. That is a very hard struggle. Shared Traumatic Reality it's a journal article, it's really good. Back table, do you guys want to say anything? Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. No, please.
I was just going to add to it. So I think the hardest part for me, and it was a couple months into it, I had become very attached to this one family who would not, whose pride stood before everything, and they would not leave their home. Their home had been under 2-3 feet of water. They were 99 and 75 years old. And they would not leave the home. And I lost contact with them and talked to them like all the time, lost contact with them somewhere along the way, only to find out that one of them was in the hospital with a lung disease and the other one had passed away in the home. So always being a caretaker, I was not ready for how it was going to affect me personally. I had never even laid eyes on the people. But just talking to them every day, knowing their situation and knowing that you've tried, but then you feel like, what did I not do?
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you for sharing that. That is the dark night of the soul that we have in this work. Is could I have done it differently? What could I have done? And sometimes there's not those do-overs. When someone passes, I mean, we can learn from that and make it not be different. But yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And then there's also this piece that's just called survivor guilt. You know? Just quickly, this isn't on my talk, but quickly, I had the chance to meet the President of the United States a year after our disaster. It also happened to be my birthday. Anyway, I was giddy with excitement to meet President Obama. I actually got to meet him, blah, blah, blah. He wished me happy birthday. I was giddy, giddy, giddy. I get home, I'm giddy for about 5 hours, you know, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I get home and I burst into tears. And like my kids and my husband are like, what? And I'm like, the only reason I met President Obama today was because it was on the backs of 162 people dying in my community. And I can't forget that. And so understanding that survival guilt will just jar you every once in a while. Maybe it's when you laugh for the first time. Maybe it's when you go to the park that bad things happened in your community and you're just having fun and you're popping balloons and all of a sudden you're like, but that 12-year-old doesn't get to pop balloons anymore. And so just understand survival guilt. And so thank you so much for sharing that. And that is a very hard thing. You're already on the recovery and on the journey by saying it out loud. So the monster can't get any bigger if you say it out loud. And everything that we say is a commonality. All of us have those what ifs. Back table, can I share or was that confidential? So I asked the back table, I just was walking around because I'm nosy that way. Anyway, and I said, what's the hardest part? And they said, the frustration of waiting for the government and the money and all. And I'm like, oh yeah, amen. Can we get an amen in here? Is that not an amen? Stephanie and I were co-chairs of the LTRC in Joplin, and I don't think we were the chairs yet. We went through a series, we had people burn out. Stephanie and I were the last chair people of the Long-Term Recovery Committee. But 9 months into it, we were still asking the disaster case management entities, and we had 3 agencies who were funded to do disaster case management, for a business card, for their phone number, so we could give it to the affected people. And they're like, oh, we don't want you to do that yet because we're not ready. Like, what the heck? How can you not be ready after 9 months? Well, they weren't ready because the declaration was there, but the money wasn't there. And so they did not want to start disaster case management because it wouldn't be billable if they did it before the money got there. Does that make sense? Made no sense to me whatsoever. So I feel your guys' pain with your conversation. I think probably there's some other people in the room that would say that's one of the hardest things is this giddy up, let's go. But we can't do certain things, or we'll be out of bounds with funding, or we'll be out of bounds with regulations. And I'm just a person that thinks outside the box. So maybe I don't do capital DCM, capital disaster case management. But you know what? I can have a cup of coffee with you, Jeff. Come on in. I can have a cup of coffee with you guys. I can listen to you. I can give you what is the best gift, which is human contact, whether it's billable or not. Okay, so think outside the box. But anyway, thank you, back table, for sharing your frustration. And it is, if there's something nationally that we can do, it is to, in my opinion, is to expedite some of this stuff that holds us back. Because it's very hard to say to an affected family, well, I want to help you, but I can't yet. It's hard. That to me, you know, the Hippocratic oath that doctors take, do no harm. I think sometimes that could be harmful to say, I want to help you, but I can't. it'd be nicer to not help at all. Yes, go ahead.
Can I say, and I know it's not my question, nobody's addressed it yet, but I'm just gonna ask it. So, how many people here's family is like right on board with everything you're doing, all this extra volunteer work? And how many's family is not? That has been a huge thing for me, and the hardest part of the post-disaster work.
Okay, not support from your family?
Yes,
Excellent, okay.
because you think you're out there doing all these wonderful things, but your family's so used to having you right there that suddenly you're gone, and rather than be supportive of what you're doing, it's like, oh my God, are you gonna do this again? And when is this gonna be over? And
Yeah.
and it's not just me, because I know there's other people
Sure.
in our group that
Sure.
have to struggle with that same kind of thing.
Yeah, and so by nature, if you're talking about teenagers, they're self-centered people. Oh, okay. Okay, well, by nature, everybody wants their mama. No. I didn't have that particularly in my family, but I also mitigated a lot of stuff. I didn't watch the news with my kids. I didn't tell them a lot of things that I was doing. Again, I was a university professor, and so I had the whole summer free. I was a volunteer. Both Stephanie and I were volunteer long-term recovery chair people. I don't think we ever knew anybody could get paid for this kind of work. Anyway, we were volunteers for 3 years, but I had a lot of time, and so I didn't. It wasn't in addition to a 40-hour-a-week job what I was doing, and so, but I mitigated a lot of that so that my kids, I buffered it from my kids so that they weren't. Again, my husband's a fireman. He used to scrape people. You know, he'd have bad car wrecks. Scrape people off the concrete, and he'd come home and sometimes would share that. And I knew my kids didn't need to hear all the stuff that we were involved with. So, but I think that's a great comment, and I would have to say then, as a human being, you got to evaluate what's most important on any given day, on any given week, on any given month, or any given year. And just do that. And sometimes motherhood's going to win, and sometimes LTRC is going to win. But it is your priority, and nobody can judge. I hope nobody judges that. It's your priorities. Okay, number 4, tables. What would you wish you could have done differently up to this point? Anything? Any regrets yet? No regrets. That's groovy.
I think what we could have done a little different. We could have been more ready, more preparedness, because when the storm hit, it seemed like nobody was prepared for the storm, and it really affected a lot of people. A lot of people was hurt. A lot of people was devastated by the storm, and you reached out to them, but nothing you can do to help them at the time. And you wish you could have helped them, and you wish you had the answer to a lot of their questions. I had a gentleman come in, and he cried on my shoulder into the shelter because he lost 2 horses and 3 dogs, and there was nothing I can do for him, but I just gave him a hug and told him it's going to be all right. And I had another incident where a gentleman came in about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was able to at least help him because he was on the top of his house for about 17 hours holding this dog, and he said I was about to give up. Me and my dog was going to drown, and a light flashed, and that gave him hope. And when he came in, we was able to give him dry clothes and a hot meal. And certainly we're working hard now in Hardin County to be more prepared, be more ready. If we're going to have disasters from time to time, but we want to have an answer for these people needs, because there will be needs, and I don't want to be without an answer for them.
Thank you. Yeah, we all live with regrets. Yes, please, back in the 3rd table. We all live with regrets. I want to say to you, sir, you gave one of the best gifts, which is your presence, okay? You may not have solved the problem, which is different than I didn't know what to do. You gave your presence to another human being. It's beautiful. That is 80% of the work, I believe. Sometimes we're rushing around trying to get socks and shoes for people. Just being present is going to heal them as well. So hats off.
Okay, so I've been sitting here trying to decide what I would say, because to answer the question, what do you wish you would have done differently? I don't think we would have done anything differently because we did what we knew to do.
Good.
We've never been hit with anything like that before, but the next time we will.
Excellent. So no regrets, but lessons learned. And that's actually what I say about myself is I've got a whole bunch of lessons that I learned through this process.
A section of our town had flooded many times, and we were available to help them. But it was of such a huge magnitude this time, we didn't know what to do. We weren't ready. I think we've gotten a little complacent, so next time we will be more ready.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all. Did you enjoy this? So this was really easy. This came out of my head one day, one Friday afternoon, as we started having those big volunteer groups leaving. I thought, man, we ought to do like a little debrief, but also it's just good. So I'd encourage you guys to do this in your LTRC periodically. Not every meeting, but every once in a while, and we'll talk about that here in a minute about rituals and marking time. So anyway, okay. Gauging how you're doing. I really hate the word self-care. No offense to anybody else that has said it today, but gag me with a spoon because I never had enough time. I didn't have time to do self-care, because in my head, self-care is I'm going to go get a massage or get my toes. Heck, if I drank a cup of orange juice in the morning, I thought that was the best self-care I could do sometimes. Throwing a vitamin in my mouth. So we had a hospital we had two hospitals in Joplin, and Mercy Hospital, which is a Catholic hospital. It was actually called St. John's at the time of the tornado. It was absolutely demolished. It was kind of the iconic thing that a lot of people saw on TV. And they not just lost their hospital, but basically they had no jobs for their 1,200 employees. And I always want to give a shout out to Mercy Corporate out of St. Louis. They made a commitment to keep all 1,200 people on the payroll. And they said, well, we don't know what we're going to do with you, but we're going to keep you on the payroll because we know it's devastating to this economy if anything's changed. And they were able to move people out in skilled areas. Nurses drove 20 miles away and did nursing. But a lot of people then became kind of, in some ways, compassion advocates. And they developed this thing that's called How's Your Five? And they had buttons. This is one of their buttons. And they wore them, all their employees wore them. And then when they were out in the community, they like to give these buttons out to people. And basically, you need 5 things every day while you're going through life. Also disasters, but life, you could probably use these 5 things. Work, love, play, sleep, and eat. And so it became a real quick way to say, how you doing today? Have you gotten enough sleep? Are you doing some meaningful work? Have you laughed and played today? Do you have love in your life? And then do you have food? I should have started with that because that's my favorite. But anyway, so this is just a real quick way. How's your 5? And I've heard it before in other aspects, the word HALT, H-A-L-T, as an acronym of never get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. That's when you need to halt. So this is just one of those examples. So I want to talk about a few little ways for you guys, because then you guys can take it out to your people, and those people can take it out to those people. So it's not just for disaster work that we need to do some self-care or what I call well-being, but these are things just in your community. And we will talk about the spectrum of people who are really having a mental health crisis as well. I just didn't want this to be all about psychiatric care, because it's a continuum. We're all on a continuum of feeling pretty good on any given day to it's really a hardship. So the speediest way to stamp out stress or fatigue or doubts or the big questions in the world or lethargy is to get back connected to your 5 senses. I was teasing Nina that I said at 3 o'clock when I started, what I'm going to have us all do is go outside for 45 minutes, because that's better than me talking. We need sunshine, right? You guys are all like, yeah, well, come on, let's do it. I was going to open all these curtains so we can see sunshine. But our 5 senses are the quickest way to get back to anything. So here's some example. Our visual. Visualize a calming experience. Or if you look around, it may be, this little area had some sunshine earlier. I was watching the sun out of that corner. Find something that is visually happy and stimulating for you. Listen to soothing music. Enjoy a juicy piece of fruit. When you bite into an orange, can you all think about an orange right now? And you can smell it and taste it That is a calming attribute. Stop and do belly breathing. We're going to do that here in a minute. Splash cold water on your face or wrist. So some of you guys are maybe in the trenches where you're hearing trauma stories, you're hearing the disaster story, and that can be really exhausting. And I forget, is it Joy, was it? What's my social worker's friends? Morgan, sorry. Morgan said you intentionally let your workers work 45 minutes so they have a little debrief before they go to their next client. If you don't have that, go to the restroom and just splash cold water on your face. It'll bring you back. Cold water on your wrist, it'll bring you back. Get up and stretch. So I was going to have you guys, Stephanie Brady says her son calls it getting the wiggles out. Everybody has to stand up and go boogity, boogity, boogity. Anyway, I won't make you do it. But I will ask you to stand up, take 2 steps away from your table, if you will participate with me. And I only say 2 steps away from your table so that you do not have your electronics. We are worse than the children, myself included. So do you guys know what a belly breathing is? It's also called diaphragmatic breathing, but typically we as Americans breathe kind of from our chest up. We do a lot of, yeah, and then this happened, and then this happened. And we do that. I loved when somebody said, we're no longer in crisis mode. It's been a year since the disaster. We get the adrenaline rush. We stay in that adrenaline rush. And so belly breathing will really help you center yourself and come back. And it will really clear your space. It's one of the yoga kind of moves. Anyway, so they do call it diaphragmatic breathing. I work with kids a lot, so I just call it belly breathing. But what I want you guys to do is just put your hand on your belly, and we're going to try to blow the balloon up so your hand comes out, and then it goes back in. And we're going to do that on the count of 3. Typically, we close our eyes, and there's a couple other, we'll just do it 3 times, and then I'll tell you some other techniques. So if you'll close your eyes, and we always want to breathe in from our mouth and out from our nose on the count of 3. So in, 1, 2, 3, out, 1, 2, 3. In, 1, 2, 3, and out, 1, 2, 3. And in, 1, 2, 3, and out, 1, 2, 3. All right. Did everybody get their balloon? Did you get your balloon out? Does your head feel clearer? Okay, it's also called, what is it when we hyperventilate? Do you feel hyperventilate? I just teasing. It's a cheap high. No, I'm just teasing. So the idea is as you're breathing in, you can say this as you're doing this, and you might want to do this with your community, is breathe in all that is good, and then breathe out all that you worry. Or breathe in all that is worthwhile and happy. Breathe out all those things that scare you. And you can use lots of different words. Thank you all. Did you guys like that? Okay, you can sit back down at your electronics. Now I teach college again, and we use the electronics because nobody's going to put away their electronics anymore. So instead of telling students to put them away, now we use them for good, not evil. Like they have to wait. We play Jeopardy basically in college. I know that's silly. Anyway, okay, so those are some ideas for your own like self-care and moving forward. And then I want to talk a little bit about the last one, and that is find a safe place to have your feelings. And as humans, we typically talk our feelings. If feelings don't come from your head up, feelings are about in your heart or in your body, the tension in your neck, the sadness, the overwhelming sadness you have. And so you can't think your feelings away. You have to feel your feelings away. And I shared with somebody already today that if the eyes are the windows to the soul, then crying is just window washing. And so when you wash your windows, don't you see better out of your car? So think if you wash your soul, you're gonna live better. You're gonna be connected to people better. Never apologize for crying, you're just window washing. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about when somebody should get help, that mental health thing that we It always scares people over here, or not you guys personally. The table 3s and 4s, no, I'm just teasing, not you guys personally. But somehow we're like, oh, that kind of scary. I do want to again say to Pastor, thank you for sharing your journey, and that your family said, Jeff, it's time to go do something, and that you have taken medication. We're really afraid to talk about some of that stuff in America. We saw it last week, 2 people suicided that we know of. I mean, famous people suicided. We know there's more of them. And so I want to talk about when is it a good idea to get help. And so this is you guys that are in the trenches. This is for your volunteers, your employees, and it's for your community. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we did as a Joplin community to get the word out. The first thing is this sign here, don't let one disaster lead to another. I know we've talked about the second disaster, which is all those unsolicited donations. But don't let one disaster to lead to another came out of Iowa, and it was really about the increase in domestic violence, the increase in adult substance abuse, and the increase in teenage substance abuse. And they saw that after some of their disasters, and so they put together a huge public campaign about not allowing second disasters to occur, that the family functioning and the social tapestry of your community cannot go downward too far if it's to come back up. So if you're having trouble functioning at home or work, so what does that mean? Well, like you can't get your crap together enough to get out of the house a day and a day and a day and again. That's kind of functioning. That means it's okay to halt, remember? No, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. If you're tired, you're tired. Take a break. Emotionally numb and disconnected. I would be worried about somebody who isn't crying at times when we hear those stories. I loved what you guys shared. I would be worried about a volunteer that's like, just another day in paradise. I saw 3 dead bodies. No, that's not okay. So a lot of people do this psychic numbing is what we call it. And so we think from our head, well, it's just my job. I got to go. You cannot be a robot and be a human being. Somewhere we got to get the interplay there. We don't want to be totally overboard where we can't not stop crying, but at the same time, psychic numbing is not good. Or you find yourself being removed. You remove yourself further and further from your own social group. You quit going to church, you quit going to the Cub Scouts, you quit going, because it's just too much effort, because I'm really busy at LTRC or whatever. You want to check yourself. Yes, we all are very, very busy, but don't isolate yourself from everything that is not disaster. You got to have a balance. So find some places that you're not talking disaster 24/7. Having terrifying memories, nightmares, or flashbacks, that's a pretty good indicator. We call it sleep disturbances. Go talk to somebody, and like Pastor Jeff said, a lot of times it's faith-based people we start with. You don't have to go get a professional mental health, a shrink that's going to look at your head and tell you what's wrong with you. I do that for a living, and it's fun. I mean, don't be afraid of us kind of people, but it's not, you can start at a lower level. Using alcohol or drugs to feel better. If you find yourself coping with some of those, and I would put gambling, sex, over-shopping, there's all sorts of behavior addictions that we're learning about in the mental health world. You doing any of those things to avoid real life, I would encourage you to take an inventory, take a check to see if you're doing okay. And then avoiding things that remind you of the trauma. I lived in Joplin 35 years, well now, so whatever, 28 years when the disaster happened. And driving through town was very trauma triggering. The place that my first husband and I got married was demolished. That church was demolished. My first husband passed away years ago from lung cancer. The place that I had his funeral was demolished. Where we lived, my first husband and I lived, was demolished. It was as if, even though it's been 28 years since he passed away, even though it was many, many years, that disaster took me back to that, and nothing was there that could remind me of my first marriage. It was all gone. Does that make sense? And so I quit driving certain roads because it was just too painful. And that's okay, but I did at least get out of my house. But if you're avoiding a lot of things, then you want to take a look at that. The other thing that's around emotional and mental health is what I call meaning making, and we've talked a little bit about it. It's the spiritual realm, if you would. So we talked about serving others when your life has also been affected, Morgan and other people mentioning that. And how do you prioritize that maybe I need to not work for a week before school starts again, even though everybody else wants me to organize things for kids. And this was, my role has been a lot of being a social worker for children. And so people, and at the time of our disaster, I had a 14-year-old and a 11-year-old. And there was times I had to say, you know what, the other 1,000 kids in Joplin, you're gonna have to just hold on. I'm taking my kids to the lake. So figuring out that, and that's really hard. Survival guilt. My house was not damaged by the tornado. Like I said, I met President Obama. I mean, there's these times that you'll just feel really guilty. That I have friends that say they came out economically better after the tornado. They feel really guilty saying that out loud. But their house insurance and their FEMA reimbursement allowed them to go buy a bigger, better house. That's called survival guilt. We had a lot of deaths. I don't know that, I looked at Hurricane Harvey. It looked like there was maybe 20 deaths total, maybe. So you guys may not be dealing with the death piece. How much? Oh, okay. Well, that darn Wikipedia. I just was looking at Wikipedia. And then there's spiritual questions that will drain you psychologically if you're not careful. So in Joplin, we're in the Bible Belt. We used to be known as a place that was gay-friendly, and that really bothered a lot of people. If you're in the Bible Belt and you don't believe in homosexuality, and then you're known in a town for being gay-friendly, there was a lot of things that happened after our tornado that didn't fit my paradigm, didn't fit my spiritual paradigm, that God was cleaning up our town. God was yeah, no kidding, Robin. God wanted those people to die. And I'm like, that is not my spiritual answer. But understand there will be people that will be angry and frustrated and look emotionally unhinged. And it's really a spiritual question they're running around. Because it ultimately comes back to the spirit. Why did this happen to us? Why did my neighbors survive, but my own grandmother didn't? Why do bad things have to happen to the kid that just graduated? That was one of our stories in Joplin. An 18-year-old graduated and was killed on the way home. His dad was in the car. His dad was fine. He was killed. How do you answer those questions and be prepared as a community maybe even to answer those questions? All right, so these are things about community well-being. Do you guys like what I'm talking about? Okay, because off the top of my head. So this is, I couldn't find the paper copy, but this is from my computer. We made crisis service roadmaps, because everybody assumes if somebody's crying, they're suicidal, and we got to get them inpatient hospitalization. And that's not going to happen. So this is just a nice little graph. We're a small town, 40,000. We only have one psychiatric unit. So we're not really big, but we blitzed this out as well as some other resources really, really quickly. So everybody understood that if somebody's in an emotional crisis or a mental health crisis, and you guys kind of know what I mean, an emotional crisis is just, this sucks. A mental health crisis is, I don't know if I'm going to live or not tomorrow. I'm seeing little green Martians or whatever. So we put this out to every minister. We have a ministerial alliance in town that was very, very active. I gave them each a notebook, a 3-ring binder. This was on the top of it. And then I listed out mental health helpers for children, mental health helpers for teenagers, mental health. So the professionals. And then we also listed every support group in town, not just disaster-related stuff, but our normal community resources. So is anybody in the mental health world on your LTRC? Oh, you are back there. Excellent. Morgan is. Anybody else have a mental health worker on your LTRC or G? Find one quick. Okay, excellent. Find somebody quick, because they will know the resources and they can understand kind of the levels of interventions. But that was really helpful. So we gave 120 of these out to every minister in town. We gave these out to every school guidance counselor. We gave this to every disaster case manager. We had 20 disaster case managers by the time we got up and running with our DCM. So everybody had the same set of resources. Inside of this also was verbiage paragraphs that I had written about how to regain your emotional balance when you're a kid, when you're an adolescent, when you're an adult, when you're elderly. So some just basic language. That's really, really helpful in this day and age. You guys could probably put it on a website. You don't have to do it in, I'm old school, hard copy everything. The other thing that we did about a year into it, once we got a disaster case management office with a phone number and all those good things, is our community mental health center received some federal funding to restabilize our community for mental health services. And I was able to leverage one of their workers to sit in the office of disaster case management. Really wanted them to be in the lobby just drinking a cup of coffee, because that's where all the stories happen, right? It's not, the minute you say, come into my office, we're going to do therapy, nobody talks. Anyway, but that was a great relationship. So we had a dedicated mental health worker sitting with the disaster case managers. Your disaster case managers are going to have to hear those stories over and over again. And people, for the most part, if they've been traumatized, and maybe you guys have found this out, they don't tell the Reader Digest condensed version, do they? They have to tell you that the wind was this and the rain was this, and I was wearing blue pants and a yellow shirt, and I had thought about eating oatmeal that day, but I didn't. And you're like, oh my gosh, get to the story, right? So having a mental health worker with your disaster case managers, your case managers have 45 minutes to do all that paperwork. Then they can say, hey, Jeff, can you have a cup of coffee with Sally? And Jeff knows that's code. She needs to talk. So Sally now goes to Jeff's office, and Jeff listens to the story and helps with the emotional healing. Does that make sense? Okay. So these are some other community well-beings. What time is it? Oh, okay, great. Anyway, Tuesday. Yeah. 2018 or 19. Yeah, I do like to talk. Quick tips for community well-beings, rituals. I could probably go on and on and on about the groovy things our community did, and I know at 4 o'clock, Stephanie and I are going to talk about even our LTRC did. I have to tell you, rituals just make meaning out of things. So as a community, I loved when Jeff talked about some of the rituals they've done in Greensburg, some of the rest of them. We, for some reason, started painting walls in Joplin. We got a whole lot of paintings in Joplin, and this is really one of the first ones, I think, wasn't it, Steph? But anything that you can do to acknowledge it. And so a lot of times, people are reluctant to talk about the it. I mentioned that I was widowed when I was 28, and a lot of people were like, oh, I don't want to make her cry. Well, you know what? Guess what, guys? I knew my husband was dead, right? I knew it. I wanted somebody to say his name to me periodically. I wanted somebody to make meaning out of his life and death for me. So I help your community make meaning out of this event, and I think we can do that by rituals, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So involve all ages. I love what Chris said. I think Joplin did do a concerted effort about adolescents and children. We had a FEMA trailer, I forget what it's called. Thank you, THU, not called FEMAville. We had temporary housing units, about 600 trailers that FEMA brought in, and those were in some ways dispersed, but we had one very large mobile home park right out by our airport, because that was where we had the most land. And we made a ruckus enough that FEMA then also purchased playground equipment for our kids out there. Because we said, what? You want these kids to do what in August? I don't think so. And so we really did do a lot of neat things around children and youth, and I could go on and on. The day before school started, or the week before school started, we had a kind of a community reunion. May 22nd happened like 3 days before school should have ended. So school ended without anybody ever saying goodbye or having those endings. And so that whole summer, everybody was just kind of on a, And so we put together a very large event out of our university and invited all the kids, and it was just fun. It was all those crazy things you do, like mudslides and just crazy stuff, just fun. Nobody used the T word. We just had fun, and we wanted people to see their friends again. So we have a thing called Third Thursday. Every third Thursday of the month, unrelated to our disaster. But for the years that we were in an LTRC, we were down there doing something kind of therapeutic. So these kids are drawing, I think this went to Moore, Oklahoma. This was our well wishes. Moore, Oklahoma had a horrible tornado about a year after us, and they're about 3 hours drive from us. So we sent this. Another time we had refrigerator boxes, and we asked the kids to build Joplin back with refrigerator and dishwasher boxes so they could paint on them, and they'd say, this is the hospital. Another time we got Legos donated to us, lots of good Legos, and we had just all the Legos on a table, and they got to rebuild Joplin with us. And we have kept those, and we use those as table decorations periodically. Ceremonies, somebody said something about having those home dedications. I can't tell you how many I went to. I loved them. I don't know if everybody else was grooving on them as much as I was. That's where my heart sung. That's when I felt the proudest, was when I was at those ceremonies. Because at our, we had about 1,200 people in the LTR, or in the disaster case management system. So we had a lot of families that we were looking after it. And so as the chairperson of the LTRC, only when it rose to us spending our money did I really get to know anybody, and then it was just a blip, and Stephanie will talk about that tomorrow, how we spent our money. So this is what connected me to the volunteers and to the homeowners. And I want to tell a quick story. I told my new friend Chuck, back here from Bastrop, never underestimate the work you guys are doing, or the volunteers, the work they're doing. I went to this one family, typical, pretty middle-class looking family. The guy was about 35, he had a wife and 2 teenagers. And whenever we had home dedications, and this was Samaritan's Purse, the orange people, the orange shirt people, usually a minister or pastor would give them a Bible and say a few words, and then they'd hand over the microphone to the homeowners. And I'm just gonna call him Mark. Mark begins to speak, and he says, I have to tell you about the journey before the tornado. I was a desperate man. My life was really headed nowhere. His wife and 2 children are standing next to him. I had a secret alcohol addiction. I was drinking alcoholically. I know you guys didn't know that. I'm sorry. I was about to lose all of our money. We were fighting constantly, and the tornado happened, and I felt worse and worse. And I have to tell you when you guys gave me this house back today, it's more than a house, because you know what happened? Those orange shirt guys from Atlanta, Georgia, came in, and so Samaritan Purse came 3 times to his home. 12 men from Atlanta, Georgia came in 3 different times. And he watched them, he said, at noon every day they'd drop their hammers and they'd go and they'd sit around a table and they'd start with a serenity prayer and they'd end with a hand holding their hands, and they were always happy, happy people. Finally one day I said, what gives with you guys? And they said, oh, well, we're all recovering alcoholics. This is an AA meeting. And he said he dropped to his knees and he said, wow, I've been drinking alcoholically and I don't know an answer. I don't know an answer. So the very next day he started having lunch with them. And so now, 6 months later, he's telling his story to his wife and children, who are weeping. I'm standing there weeping too. Who walks in the door? The 12 men from Atlanta, Georgia. That's an 18-hour drive from our house. And he said, those are my angels. Thank you guys. I'll never forget this. He said, thank you guys. You didn't give me a home or a house. You gave me a home, and you gave my life back to me and my children and wife. Okay, if you guys ever get tired, remember that story. Isn't that the most beautifulest thing? I went because I'm a voyeur, okay? I'm just telling you. It was either that or the pool. No, I love people. I love people. Go and hear your stories. Hear these stories, you guys. Isn't that so beautiful? So marking time, we did a lot of things of just letting people share out, just share out, be visual, be a part of what's good. In terms of also marking time, and we'll probably talk this at 4 o'clock, but every time I knew we had passed a month as the long-term recovery chairperson, I acknowledged that. We're now in month 5 of our recovery. And then what I also did was usually read something, and we'll talk about that maybe at 4 o'clock. But be concerted and be a part, walk the walk. If you want other people to feel emotionally healthy, you gotta feel emotionally healthy, and you gotta acknowledge it. Put it out there for them. So this is one of the, let me go back. I can't remember what else I wanted to say there, so it must not be important. Anyway, so this is one of the things that I like to read. And I have all sorts of readings, so if you don't know what to read during your marking time, life is amazing, and then it's awful, and then it's amazing again. And in between the amazing and the awful, it's ordinary and mundane and routine. Breathe in that amazing. Hold on through the awful and relax and exhale during the ordinary. That's just living, heartbreaking, soul-healing, amazing, awful, ordinary life. And it is breathtakingly beautiful. We talked about post-traumatic stress syndrome. So I got to tell you, there's an opposite to that, and that's all that's on my mind. There's this thing that's out in the literature now called post-traumatic growth syndrome, and some people grow from trauma. So this PTSD always talks about a decline and a decline and decline. Post-traumatic growth says that some people, this is their breakout moment. And I don't know about you guys, but that's how I feel after our LTRC is no longer active. But I think this was my post-traumatic growth syndrome. So there are gifts in the trauma. There are gifts in the pain. And so if you're holding on by your strings, you might look at the literature. Again, it's called post-traumatic growth syndrome. And there's a scale. It really came out of the domestic violence world, that a lot of people who were victims of violence went on and did fabulous things. And so they grew from their trauma, and they shared their trauma in a healthy way. So anyway, just wanted to give you that piece of literature as well.